Now we're going to begin the reproductive system. This is a reproductive overview. Number one, we have the formation of different sexes. A, males and females look the same as embryos. B, around 13 weeks of pregnancy, sex organs begin to form. C, sex organs aren't functional until puberty. At puberty, the hypothalamus tells the pituitary gland. Both are important parts, the hypothalamus and the pituitary. The pituitary is the master gland we learned in the endocrine system. The hypothalamus is the bottom part of the brain to make two hormones, FSH, follicle-stimulating hormone, and LH, luteinizing hormone. In males, the LH causes the testes to produce testosterone. Testosterone and FSH equals sperm production. Here we see the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. Now in the females, FSH, follicle-stimulating hormone, and LH, luteinizing hormone, cause the ovaries to make estrogen and progesterone, and that leads to egg production. Now let's compare the male anatomy and physiology and then the female. In the male anatomy and physiology, we have the scrotum that holds the testes, and it keeps them about 2 degrees cooler than the body. Then we have the seminiferous tubules that make sperm. They make millions a day. It can be as many as 50 million to 500 million daily. The epididymis is C, and that stores the sperm for a short time to be transferred to the vas deferens. And D, the semen, is a nutrient-rich fluid to feed sperm. It's a mixture of several glands. It's Cowper's gland fluid, prostate gland fluid, and the actual sperm. Here we have an image of the male anatomy. Now let's go over the structure of a sperm. We have the head of the sperm and we have the acrosomal cap that will go through the actual egg. And inside the head we have the nucleus. The nucleus of the sperm contains 23 chromosomes. We have the mitochondria, and that's how it generates its energy for its trip, and then the tail. Now let's contrast the female anatomy. A, in the female anatomy, there's only one egg made each 28-day cycle. B, the FSH causes the follicle to develop. The egg is inside. C, the follicle produces estrogen, and as the levels increase, the egg is released. D, ovulation is usually on the 14th day of the cycle, or day 14. Here we see the female anatomy. We see the ovaries, the fallopian or uterine tubes, the uterus, the cervix, and then the vagina. Here we see ovulation. We see the ovary, the follicle, and the egg being released, and there are 4 different images of the actual harvesting of the egg. Here we see the release of the egg from the ovary, the actual oocyte, which is the egg, from day 0 all the way to implantation between day 7, 8, and 9. Now, in the female anatomy, the egg travels down the fallopian tube to the uterus. The estrogen and progesterone prepare the uterus for pregnancy. That's the buildup of the lining of the blood vessels. If the egg is not fertilized in the first 24 hours, it dies, and then the hormone levels drop off. When they get low enough, menstruation occurs and the uterine lining is shed, and the uterine cycle begins again. When the sperm fuses with an egg, it's called fertilization. The tip of the sperm has the acrosome. It produces an enzyme to break down the egg surface. Only the head enters. The zygote's a fertilized egg. The egg has 23 chromosomes. The sperm has 23 chromosomes for a total of 46 chromosomes. It undergoes many divisions as it travels to the uterus and implants, and it usually takes about 7 to 9 days. Again, this is an image of fertilization, and from the release of the egg to fertilization and the traveling down of the zygote down the fallopian or uterine tubes all the way to implantation. Now, if fertilization takes place, a hormone is made called HCG, or human chorionic gonadotropin. This is what is detected in pregnancy tests. This hormone keeps menstruation from occurring until the embryo can implant. The placenta forms, and the lining of the blood vessels, which comes very close to the uterine blood supply, connecting the baby's blood supply to the mother's. This connects the unborn by the umbilical cord. Remember, the bloods don't mix. Only diffusion of nutrients, waste, and oxygen can occur. Here the baby is pictured in the uterus in the proper position, head down, and you can see the placenta and the uterus. Now, if you compare and contrast these pictures, the picture on the left, we have a normal baby in position, and this is a normal placenta, the umbilical cord, and the uterine wall and the cervix. But on the right, we have placenta previa. That means the placenta is in front of the baby's head, and that would cause a major problem. This baby on the right would have to be delivered by cesarean section. Now let's go over a summary of first weeks of pregnancy. On day 1, we have the zygote, it's one cell. On day 4, we have the morula, it's a solid ball. On day 7, the blastula, it's a hollow ball. On day 14, the gastrula, it's a folded ball with 3 layers of tissue. On day 21, it becomes an embryo, and at 8 weeks, it becomes a fetus. Let's talk about pregnancy. Pregnancy lasts 40 weeks from the last menstrual period, or 38 weeks from fertilization. It's divided into 3 trimesters of about 3 months each. The first trimester is called organogenesis. All the systems form. The heart beats in the 4th week. The second trimester of pregnancy, the organs mature and the unborn gains weight, and the sex can be determined. That's when we said about week 13. And then on the 3rd trimester is where most of the growth occurs. The baby actually gets larger. The lungs mature and the baby turns upside down for birth. This is a diagram illustrating the 40 weeks of pregnancy. We have week 1, week 4, week 8, week 12, 24 weeks, and 40 weeks. Let's summarize childbirth. In a perfect system, first, oxytocin is produced. This is the hormone that induces labor. Next, the water breaks. That's followed by the cervix dilating to 10 centimeters. The baby is finally expelled. Following the baby's expulsion, we have the placenta or afterbirth being expelled. Lastly, the mother produces prolactin, a hormone, and that causes lactation to begin, or the production of milk. Now let's begin the reproductive system in general. The reproductive system is the only system not necessary for survival of the individual. It's necessary for the survival of species. Gametes are sex cells of males and females, and gonads are the reproductive organs that produce the gametes. Let's contrast the male and female reproductive system. In males, we have the testes. The testes are the male gonads, and they produce sex hormones, specifically androgens or testosterone. The male is able to produce literally hundreds of millions of sperm daily. The females, on the other hand, they have ovaries. Those are the female gonads, and they release 1 gamete a month, or an egg a month, which will end up in the uterus. That equates to 50 to 60 pregnancy opportunities in a lifetime. Now let's go over the theory of sexual fertilization. One must have intercourse. An ovary must release an egg. The egg needs to move into the oviduct, or uterine tubes or fallopian tubes. The sperm needs to swim up the tubes and try to penetrate the egg. That's the first sign of fertilization. At the sign of initial fertilization, the egg will move from the tube to the uterus. Now, the final key is the fertilized egg must attach to the uterine wall and remain attached for 9 months. Now let's go over the male reproductive system. The males have testes, and they're the shape of a flattened egg. They're about 2 inches long, an inch wide, and 2.5 inches thick. They're enveloped within a fleshy sac called the scrotum, and they're located at the anterior of the anal rectum and inferior to the base of the penis. Here's an illustration of the male anatomy. Now let's talk about the movement of sperm. Spermatozoa is another name for sperm cells, and they're produced in the testes, and they can travel, obviously, and they need to impregnate the egg. The epididymis is the area where the sperm is actually stored. The vas deferens is the long tube that connects to the ejaculatory duct. The ejaculatory duct is where the sperm moves in and then passes to the urethra. And then the urethra meets the external world and allows ejaculation. So the traveling ends here in the male and will either be released normally into the female vagina. There's a muscle called the cremaster muscle. It's a layer of the skeletal muscle deep within the dermis. When relaxed, the penis is inferior to the gonads. When aroused, the muscles contract and harden, pulling the penis closer to the body. The body temperature increases during erection, and when the environment is cold, contractions can decrease. There are 3 phases of spermatogenesis, or that's the production or creation of sperm. First, we have mitosis, which is cell division. Then we have meiosis, which is the division of the sex cells or gametes. Then we have spermatogenesis, that's the final phase. And then the semen is the volume of fluid during ejaculation, and the average is about 2 to 5 milliliters of fluid expelled. There are 3 elements contained in semen. The first element is the spermatozoa, or the actual sperm. There can be hundreds of thousands to multiple millions of sperm in a single ejaculate. Secondly, there's seminal vesicle fluid, or seminal fluid. Thirdly, there's enzymes, and that's necessary to kill bacteria when it comes in contact. These are the 3 things that make up the semen. The penis is a tube-like organ through which the distal part of the urethra exits. It conducts urine and introduces semen into the vagina. The penis is made of 3 parts. Number 1, we have the root that attaches the penis to the body. Number 2, we have the body and the shaft. That's the movable muscular trunk. And number 3, we have the glands, the head of the penis. An erection is the arousal of the penis caused by the parasympathetic nervous system. There are 4 phases of erection. Number 1, we have the nitric oxide released into the penile muscle that causes the dilation. Number 2, we have the blood flow increasing. Number 3, the penis becomes filled with blood. And number 4, the penis erects and the cremaster muscle works and contracts. Now we see the reproductive system of the female pictured here. There are 4 major organs in the female reproductive system. We have the ovaries. They're small almond-shaped organs near the lateral sides of the hips. They make the gametes, or the oocytes. That's another name for egg. And they secrete estrogen. We have the uterine tubes, which are also called oviducts or fallopian tubes. They're hollow, muscular, 5-inch tubes where fertilization takes place. Then number 3, we have the uterus, and that's the place where the baby lays for 9 months. Number 4, we have the vagina. That's the small pear-shaped elastic area responsible for muscular contractions during childbirth. Again, here we have the female anatomy pictured. We have the normal ovary, the fallopian tube, the uterus, and the vagina. And then we have the ovary on the right with the cyst. The vagina is a muscular tube. It's about 3 to 3.5 inches. The 3 functions of the ovaries include: 1, it produces the oocytes. That's another name for egg or gamete. Number 2, it produces estrogen. Number 3, it produces inhibin. And then oogenesis is the creation of the female eggs, and it lasts from puberty to menopause. There are 3 functions of the uterus. Number 1 is mechanical protection during sex. Number 2 is nutritional support. And number 3 is the removal of waste from the developing fetus. Now, let's go over 3 more functions of the vagina. Number 1 is the passage for the elimination of the menstrual fluids. Number 2, it receives the penis during sexual intercourse. Number 3, it serves as a birth canal. The mammary glands are in the breast, and they secrete milk, and they're located behind the breast. Lactation is the production of the milk. The uterine or female menstrual cycle. It's a repeated series of changes in the female's internal environment. The average cycle is about 28 days, but it can range from 21 days to 35 days. There are phases of the uterine cycle. Stage 1 is the menses phase. That's the vasoconstriction of the blood, and usually it's a result of cramping. And then there's weakened blood vessels that rupture, leaking from the blood from the vagina. Stage 2 is called the proliferative phase. This is when the uterus heals after the blood loss, and then there's an increase of glycogen, that's stored sugar, stored glucose, and nutrients. And then stage 3 is the secretory phase. That's the final stage, and you can determine ovulation date. Normally it's around day 14 of the menstrual cycle. Now remember, when I teach you this is the model. Menarche is the very first menstruation. It can start 11, 12, 13 years old, depending on the individual female. And then menopause, that's the last menstruation, and again, that can last from ages from 44 to 55 years old. And then copulation is another name for sexual intercourse. Development is the gradual modification of anatomical structures during periods from fertilization. Embryos, they're the first sign of development in a successful fertilization. Pictured here is an embryo. Fetal development begins during the 9th week and continues until birth. Prenatal care is the care of the embryo and the fetus. Postnatal care is the care from birth to maturity. Here a fetus is pictured at 20 weeks of development. Some basic definitions. Inheritance is the transfer of genetic materials, usually from the parents, mom and dad. Genetics is responsible for inheritance. And then gestation is another name for the pregnancy, and it lasts 40 weeks. There are 3 trimesters during the development of the fetus. And during trimester 1, we have the development of the embryo to the fetus, and the production of the major organs begin. In the second trimester, or trimester 2, there's continued development of the major organs. In the third trimester, trimester 3, most organ development is complete, and it's the major weight gain for the fetus. Now let's go through the physical changes and development month by month. Month 1, we have the neural cells, the eyes, ears, and then the heartbeat is heard. Month 2, nails, sweat glands, and kidneys develop. Month 3, we have skin, central nervous system development. Month 4, we have hair, and the fetus begins moving. Month 5, we have the tonsils and the nostrils open. Month 6, we have the spleen and liver developed. During month 7, we have the gonad development and the eyelids open. During month 8, we have the skeletal system forming. And during month 9, we have the final maturation of the lungs. The lungs are formed. And during the gestation period, the uterus grows from 3 to 12 inches in dilation. Now let's begin the 3 stages of labor. First, we have dilation. That's the beginning of true labor. It can last 2 to 8 hours. The fetus moves into the cervical canal. Contractions can last 30 seconds. Contractions can take place every 10 to 30 minutes, and then the water usually breaks. Second stage of labor, expulsion. The baby physically leaves the stomach. The contractions are closer every 2 to 3 minutes. They last for a minute, and during this stage is less than 2 hours. Finally, we have the placental stage, stage 3. The baby exits the womb, the walls close within an hour, and then it ends with the ejection of the placenta, and there's usually a blood loss of about 500 to 600 milliliters of blood. There are 2 possible surgeries that happen during childbirth. If the birth canal is too small, 2 surgeries are possible. One is the episiotomy, and that's a small incision to the anal wall that allows the head and shoulders to move more easily through the birth canal. The second is the cesarean section. That's a small cut in the lower abdomen into the uterus. This is used in 15 to 25% of all the pregnancies. And then the baby will be removed, and it won't be, the birth will not be vaginal. Now let's continue on to the next and final slide. Oh, one other thing. During premature labor, babies can be born before full development. Survival can depend on the weight and time of the delivery. If they're under 14 ounces of weight, there usually equals no survival. Infants born before 7 months have about a 50% chance of survival.